The restaurant was quiet in the way only expensive places ever were. Soft music floated through the air, not loud enough to notice unless everything else stopped. The lights were low and warm, reflecting off polished tables and tall glasses. Outside, traffic moved slowly, but inside, time felt slower. People spoke in calm voices, choosing words carefully, as if even sound itself had a price here. The evening crowd was made up of business people, foreign guests, and a few local elites. Most of them wore tailored suits or elegant dresses. Watches on their wrists cost more than some cars. This was not a place where surprises were welcome. Everything was meant to feel controlled. At one of the center tables sat a man known for his success and his temper. He had built his fortune through global trade and investments, moving money across borders as easily as others sent text messages. He was respected, feared, and often avoided by those who worked around him. People said he demanded perfection, but those close to him knew it was more than that. He enjoyed power, especially over people who could not answer back. The staff had been warned earlier that day. The manager spoke softly but firmly during the pre-shift meeting. This table would need special attention. No mistakes. No delays. No arguments. Everyone nodded. They all knew what that meant. The waitress assigned to that table listened quietly. She was new to this restaurant, though not new to hard work. Her uniform fit neatly, her hair was tied back, and her movements were calm. She did not talk much during the meeting. She simply nodded and took mental notes. To most people in the room, she was invisible, just another server blending into the background. When the guests arrived, she greeted them politely. Her voice was steady. She pulled out chairs, placed menus, and filled glasses with practiced ease. The billionaire barely looked at her. He spoke to his guests instead, discussing deals, travel plans, and numbers that sounded unreal. First, everything went smoothly. Drinks were served on time. Orders were taken carefully. But it did not take long for his mood to change. He tapped his glass lightly and frowned. The water was still. He made a small sound with his tongue, just loud enough for her to hear. When she noticed and stepped forward, he did not ask politely. He simply pointed. She refilled the glass immediately and apologized, even though it had not been empty. Minutes later, he complained about the temperature of the room, then the angle of his chair, then the timing of the appetizer. Each complaint was small, but they stacked up. His tone sharpened. His patience thinned. The other guests shifted in their seats. Some smiled nervously. Some stared at their plates. No one said anything. The waitress handled each comment the same way. She listened. She nodded. She fixed the issue without defending herself. Her face showed no anger, no fear, only focus. This seemed to irritate him more. When the main course arrived, he glanced at the plate and scoffed. He said it was not what he expected, even though it matched the menu exactly. He asked her if she even understood what she was serving. His voice was louder now, cutting through the low music. She apologized again and offered to replace it. He waved his hand dismissively and leaned back in his chair. Then, with a slight smile, he switched languages. He spoke in Mandarin. At first, it sounded casual, almost playful. But the words themselves were sharp. He joked about her job, about how someone like her probably could not read the menu properly. He made comments about people who worked with their hands instead of their minds. He assumed no one around him understood. A few of his associates laughed quietly. They did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. It made them uncomfortable, yet none of them stopped him. The waitress stood still, holding the serving tray. She did not react right away. Her eyes lowered slightly, as if she were thinking. The billionaire continued. His voice grew more confident. He added more remarks, more insults, enjoying the moment. He believed he was safe behind a language barrier. To him, it was a private joke in a public space. But something about the waitress had changed. She took a slow breath. The room seemed to quiet further, though no one could explain why. Even the billionaire paused, waiting for a reaction he expected to be fear or confusion. Instead, she looked up. Her expression was calm, but there was clarity in her eyes now. Not anger. Not pride. Just certainty. She responded. She spoke in Mandarin. Her pronunciation was clear and natural. Not rushed. Not stiff. She did not raise her voice. She addressed his concern about the dish, corrected his misunderstanding, and explained the preparation in a polite, professional way. Then, still in the same language, she added a gentle reminder that respect made service better for everyone. The table went silent. The billionaire stared at her as if the room had shifted beneath him. His smile faded. For the first time that night, he looked unsure. The other guests looked from him to her, then back again. Some recognized the language. Others simply sensed that something important had happened. The waitress finished speaking and waited. She did not apologize this time. She simply stood there, steady and composed. For a long moment, no one moved. This was not how the night was supposed to go. The billionaire cleared his throat. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the attention. He nodded once, muttered a short response, and waved her away. She returned to the service station without rushing. Her hands were steady. Her heart beat fast, but her face remained calm. Behind her, whispers began to move through the room like a soft current. People were curious now, not about the food or the deals, but about her. She continued her work, serving other tables, answering questions, moving through the restaurant as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside, she knew the moment mattered. The billionaire sat quietly for the rest of the course. His voice stayed low. The power he had felt earlier was gone, replaced by something closer to discomfort. As the night went on, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. Plates were cleared, desserts were served, bills were prepared. But the air felt different. What had begun as another ordinary shift had already changed direction. And this was only the beginning. The evening continued, but the atmosphere at the billionaire's table had shifted. What began as quiet complaints now turned into something sharper, heavier. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the room, searching for some small power to reclaim. He was used to having control, and he did not like the sense that it was slipping. The waitress moved with the same careful steps, carrying plates and drinks to other tables, but her mind remained partially on his table. She had seen that moment happen, the shift in tone, the subtle change in attention. It was not just about the words she had spoken. It was about standing steady when someone expected her to falter. Her training, her experiences, had prepared her for moments like this. But the truth was, few nights were this intense. The billionaire's associates exchanged glances. They had seen people flinch before, but the waitress had not flinched. One of them, younger than the others, leaned over and whispered something that made the older man frown. His laughter, which had been confident before, disappeared. He felt exposed, and exposure was never comfortable for him. As the waitress approached the billionaire's table again, he decided to escalate. His voice rose slightly, though still quiet enough that some people nearby barely noticed. He spoke in Mandarin again, this time more sharply, his tone almost mocking. He asked questions not just about the food, but about her knowledge, her experience, and subtly about her background. His words were intended to embarrass, to make her feel small. The waitress paused for a fraction of a second. She had learned that timing was crucial. Rushing a reply could make it seem rehearsed. Hesitation could seem weakness. She took a slow, steady breath. Then, she answered clearly and confidently. She spoke in Mandarin, matching his tone politely but firmly. Her words were precise, showing knowledge of the dishes, the ingredients, and the careful preparations done by the chefs. She addressed his concerns without judgment or defensiveness, making the conversation about clarity, not conflict. Around the table, the associates stiffened. Some of them understood the language enough to know they were witnessing a rare moment. Others simply sensed the tension and watched silently, waiting for the next move. Even the billionaire was surprised. The calmness, the knowledge, and the composure of the waitress threw him off. He had not expected her to answer in a way that was both respectful and assertive. His confidence wavered. He leaned forward slightly, trying to regain control. He asked another question, this time about how the dish was prepared, assuming she might stumble or mispronounce something. But she did not. Her Mandarin flowed naturally, demonstrating more than memorized phrases. She understood culture, etiquette, and tone. It was clear she had lived this language, not just learned it. The room felt heavier. Patrons nearby, though trying to focus on their own meals, noticed the shift. The quiet hum of conversation seemed to fade as people became aware that something unusual was happening. Even the music, soft as it was, seemed to fall into the background. This was no ordinary service interaction. It had become a test of presence, intelligence, and patience. The billionaire paused. He tried to maintain the illusion of control by speaking louder, but the effect was minimal. The words seemed sharper, but they no longer carried authority. The waitress met each statement with clarity, politeness, and careful diction. She never raised her voice, yet each reply landed firmly. At one point, he asked a question in English, switching from Mandarin, trying to see if she could answer correctly under pressure. She responded, calmly translating the concept she had explained in Mandarin and adding a small, polite clarification to ensure there was no misunderstanding. Her voice remained soft but confident, the tone carrying a quiet dignity. The other guests at the table noticed the subtle power shift. The billionaire's expression, usually unreadable, showed surprise. It became clear that the waitress was not just competent. She was extraordinary. Her composure under pressure, her ability to communicate clearly, and her understanding of cultural nuance created a quiet authority. In that room, surrounded by wealth and power, she became the center of attention without demanding it. The billionaire, realizing that laughter and mockery no longer worked, leaned back once again. His mind raced. He had assumed superiority would make her falter, that the casual insults would unsettle her. Instead, he felt exposed. The room, once his domain, now seemed tilted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her service as if nothing had happened. She cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and smiled politely when thanked by other guests. But inside, she remained alert. She knew this night was unlike any other she had worked. The energy around the billionaire's table was unique. Each interaction mattered. Every word carried weight. She did not enjoy conflict, but she also did not fear it. The experiences that had brought her here, long hours of study, travel, and working in difficult environments, had prepared her for moments like this. She understood that dignity was a choice, that control over oneself could shift the balance of a room without shouting or anger. Her approach was deliberate, careful, and quiet, yet effective. The billionaire tried to regain composure. He leaned forward, attempting to redirect the conversation back to his comfort zone. He spoke in English again, discussing the business meeting he had planned earlier. But even in English, the impact of the waitress's earlier confidence lingered. His associates noticed his unease. One of them muttered a quiet question about her background. It was obvious to them that she had experience far beyond what her position suggested. The night continued with small exchanges, each one layered with subtle tension. Every move, every word, was watched closely, though most people in the restaurant were unaware of the full story. The presence of the waitress, the quiet power of her composure, had changed the dynamics of the table. What should have been a typical luxury dining experience became something more complex, more human. By the end of the main course, it was clear that the billionaire's attempt to humiliate the waitress had failed. Not only had she defended herself with grace, but she had also gained quiet respect from those around. Even the staff, who had seen him treat others harshly in the past, took note. Her performance was not about winning or showing off. It was about standing firm, staying calm, and handling a difficult situation with intelligence and patience. As she walked away from the table to clear dishes, she carried herself with the same calm she had maintained throughout. Inside, her heart still raced slightly, but her face betrayed nothing. This was her strength, to act with clarity and poise when others expected faltering. The room around her began to breathe normally again, the tension slowly fading, though the memory of the exchange lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. In quiet moments, the billionaire reflected on the incident. He was not used to being challenged, especially not in such a composed, polite manner. It was a lesson in humility, one he had rarely received. The evening would continue, but a subtle shift had occurred. One that would not be forgotten by anyone present, especially not by the waitress who had stood her ground with intelligence, patience, and quiet dignity. After the main course, the energy at the billionaire's table remained heavy, but now it was different. The earlier tension had transformed into a quiet curiosity. The guests, who had at first simply tolerated the billionaire's temper, began to notice the subtle power shift. It was not obvious, but it was there. The billionaire, who had been confident and commanding at the start, now leaned back slightly, his expression more measured, less certain. The waitress continued her work calmly, moving from table to table. She smiled politely, answered questions, and cleared plates with steady hands. To anyone watching casually, she was just a competent server doing her job. But to those at the billionaire's table, and even to the staff who had observed the earlier exchange, she had become more than that. She had become a symbol of composure under pressure. The billionaire, sensing that his attempts to assert dominance had failed, decided to try a different approach. He leaned forward and spoke in Mandarin again, this time softer, but with a hint of challenge. His words implied doubt about her knowledge, a suggestion that she might have been lucky before, but that now the real test would begin. He expected her to hesitate, to stumble, or to react emotionally. The waitress paused briefly. Her eyes met his, calm but direct. She knew that this was not about food anymore. It was about understanding, patience, and respect. Taking a slow breath, she responded in Mandarin once more, carefully choosing her words. She answered his question fully, demonstrating not just knowledge of the dishes, but understanding of cultural etiquette and the logic behind the preparation. Her tone was respectful yet firm, polite yet unmistakably confident. The room seemed to hold its breath. Guests nearby sensed the change in atmosphere even if they did not understand the language. The associates at the billionaire's table exchanged quiet glances, realizing that she had done more than answer questions correctly. She had stood her ground with dignity, transforming the situation without confrontation. The billionaire leaned back, momentarily speechless. For a man used to control, the experience was unsettling. He had expected deference, perhaps even fear, and instead found intelligence, poise, and subtle authority. He tried to recover by speaking in English, changing the subject to the business meeting he had planned. Yet even then, the impact of her composure lingered. His words sounded sharper than intended, but they lacked the effect they normally carried. Curiosity grew among the guests. Some of them whispered quietly, commenting on how unusual it was to see someone handle such a difficult situation with calm and grace. Others watched silently, observing the dynamics unfold. The waitress, aware of all of this, continued her work, attentive but composed, as if she were not aware of the attention. Her calmness itself was remarkable, creating a contrast with the billionaire's usual forceful presence. The conversation at the table shifted slightly. The billionaire attempted to regain some control by questioning the waitress's experience in a more direct way, but she responded clearly, explaining her background with care and tact. She did not boast or argue. She simply stated the facts. Her education, her years of travel, and her experience in high-pressure situations became evident not just in her words, but in her demeanor. The billionaire's associates began to feel the tension differently. They had been accustomed to seeing people falter under pressure, but the waitress did not falter. Even when challenged repeatedly, she maintained her composure. Their perception of the situation changed from amusement to respect, although few would admit it openly. Meanwhile, the billionaire's own frustration began to simmer. He had not anticipated that someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, could respond with such intelligence and calmness. His attempts to provoke a reaction had failed, and his confidence in controlling the situation diminished. He realized that he had underestimated her, and the realization was uncomfortable. At one point, the waitress approached the table again, carrying a small plate with care. She placed it in front of him, her movements precise and deliberate. Her eyes met his briefly, calm but observant. She asked if there was anything else he needed, her voice steady and polite. The billionaire hesitated. He had expected a timid response or perhaps a flustered apology. Instead, he received quiet assurance, a presence that was confident without arrogance. The guests at the table noticed the subtle change. The billionaire's usual sharpness was muted, replaced by an almost cautious attentiveness. The waitress, in contrast, projected calm strength. She had not raised her voice, had not made any dramatic gestures, and yet she had shifted the dynamic entirely. The room, for those who paid attention, had changed. This moment marked a turning point. The billionaire, who had intended to humiliate, found himself confronted with someone who could match his intellect and composure without confrontation. It was a rare experience for him, one that challenged his assumptions and forced him to reconsider his behavior. He had underestimated her, assuming that her role as a waitress implied limited ability. Now he had to face the truth. Appearance and position did not define knowledge, skill, or dignity. The waitress, for her part, continued with the rest of her service. She cleared plates, refilled glasses, and answered questions with the same calm efficiency. Her focus was on the tasks at hand, not on the reactions of others. Yet she knew that her ability to remain composed under pressure had made an impression. She understood the subtle power of dignity and patience, and she wielded it quietly, effectively, and without malice. By the end of the course, the billionaire's demeanor had softened slightly. He no longer spoke sharply, no longer attempted to dominate the conversation. His voice was measured, and while he retained his authority in the room, it was no longer unchallenged. The respect, though not openly stated, had shifted toward the waitress. The staff and other diners may not have realized the full extent of what had happened, but the energy in the room carried the weight of the exchange. A simple act of service had become a display of intelligence, patience, and human dignity. The waitress had not sought to win or embarrass. She had only acted with calm confidence and professionalism, and in doing so, she had changed the course of the evening. As she stepped away from the billionaire's table, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. Inside, her heart still raced slightly from the intensity of the interactions, but her outward composure remained unchanged. She knew that her actions had mattered, that her presence had commanded respect without confrontation. The room had witnessed a rare instance of quiet authority, a lesson in humility, and a reminder that dignity could be more powerful than wealth or position. Even the billionaire, despite his usual pride, had to acknowledge, at least to himself, the skill and calm displayed before him. The evening would continue, meals would be finished, and conversations would resume, but the memory of that moment would linger. The waitress had demonstrated that true strength often lies not in power or aggression, but in patience, knowledge, and the courage to remain composed when others expect weakness. As the evening continued, the atmosphere around the billionaire's table began to change in ways that even he could not control. The initial tension, which had been sharp and oppressive, had settled into a quiet curiosity. The guests who had been wary of his temper now watched with a mixture of surprise and respect. It became clear that the waitress was no ordinary server. Her calm confidence and knowledge had shifted the dynamic completely. The billionaire, realizing that he had underestimated her, leaned back in his chair and studied her from across the room. He noticed the small details. The way she moved with assurance, the way she handled questions without hesitation, and the subtle, confident tone in her voice. It was not just her skill at service that impressed him, but the depth behind it. There was experience, there was intelligence, and there was resilience. For someone in her position, it was remarkable. Curiosity finally overcame the billionaire's pride. He asked one of his associates quietly about her background. The answer surprised him. She had studied linguistics and international relations and had spent years living abroad, gaining fluency in several languages and a deep understanding of cultural nuances. Her time abroad had not been easy. She had worked hard, faced challenges, and learned to adapt. The education and experiences that the billionaire had assumed were out of reach for someone in her position were very real. She was highly capable, and her current job as a waitress was only a temporary circumstance. The truth shifted the billionaire's perspective in a way he had not anticipated. He had gone into the evening assuming he could humiliate someone who appeared to be beneath him in social and professional status. Instead, he was confronted with a person who had far more knowledge and composure than he had expected. It was an uncomfortable realization, and yet it was illuminating. He could see clearly now that his assumptions about people were often flawed. The waitress had earned respect, not through aggression or wealth, but through mastery of herself and her skills. The waitress, unaware that her background had been discussed, continued her work with quiet diligence. She refilled glasses, served desserts, and answered questions from other guests. Her actions were calm, professional, and measured. She did not seek attention, yet she commanded it through the way she carried herself. Every step she took reinforced the sense of competence and dignity that she had displayed earlier. As the evening progressed, a small conversation began to develop around her background. One of the guests, a diplomat attending the dinner, complimented her language skills and asked about her time abroad. She replied politely, describing her experiences with humility. She spoke of the challenges she faced, the people she met, and the lessons she learned. Her words were clear, thoughtful, and honest. There was no bragging, no attempt to assert superiority. Yet everyone listening understood that she was exceptional. The billionaire, listening from his chair, felt a mix of emotions. There was admiration, begrudgingly, and a sense of humility he rarely experienced. He had been so certain that he could assert dominance and leave the waitress feeling small. Instead, he had learned something unexpected. True strength and skill often lie hidden, waiting to be recognized. He could see now that the waitress had endured far more than he could have imagined and had remained composed in the face of his attempts to intimidate her. The staff, too, began to notice a change. They had been accustomed to his harsh behavior and to seeing others falter under pressure. But this young waitress had handled everything with grace and poise. Even the manager, who had initially warned her about the billionaire's temper, was impressed. Her performance had set a new standard for professionalism and dignity in difficult situations. It became clear to everyone in the room that her abilities extended far beyond serving food. She had mastered patience, observation, and communication under pressure. The moment became even more significant when the billionaire decided to speak to her directly, not in Mandarin, but in English, for the first time since the earlier exchanges. He asked a question about her experiences abroad, genuinely interested in her story. The question was careful, respectful, and devoid of the mocking tone he had used before. It was as if he were trying to understand, rather than dominate. The waitress answered gracefully, giving a brief but clear account of her education and travels, emphasizing the lessons she had learned and the people who had helped her along the way. Her tone was polite, calm, and composed. The conversation had a subtle effect on the billionaire. He began to realize that his assumptions about people based on appearance or occupation were flawed. The lesson was clear. Respect and understanding should not be contingent on status or role. The waitress had earned respect through her intelligence, skill, and composure. He had attempted to belittle her, but she had turned the situation into a demonstration of quiet strength, something that no amount of wealth or authority could diminish. As the evening drew toward its conclusion, the restaurant atmosphere began to return to a more ordinary rhythm. Plates were cleared, glasses were refilled, and conversations resumed. Yet, at the billionaire's table, a subtle change remained. The respect for the waitress, though mostly unspoken, was evident in the way he interacted with her from that point on. He no longer attempted to humiliate her, and his tone, though still authoritative, carried a hint of acknowledgement for her composure and skill. The waitress, for her part, continued her service with quiet professionalism. She did not seek praise or acknowledgement, though she had certainly earned it. Her focus remained on her work, on ensuring that every guest had a positive experience. Yet the impact of her actions lingered. Those who had witnessed the earlier interactions carried a new understanding of patience, dignity, and quiet authority. The billionaire himself had learned a rare lesson in humility, one that would not be forgotten quickly. By the time the evening ended, The waitress had completed her shift with the same steady efficiency she had shown all night. Her composure, skill, and intelligence had made an impression on everyone who had observed her, even if some did not fully realize it. The billionaire, reflecting on the night, understood that he had underestimated her and that his assumptions about people could not always be trusted. He had been humbled not by confrontation, but by quiet competence, and the realization was as striking as it was rare. As she left the restaurant that night, the waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had handled a difficult situation with grace and dignity, demonstrating that strength often lies in calmness, knowledge, and self-control. Her experience, her background, and her composure had all come together to transform an evening that could have been humiliating into one of personal triumph. She knew that her actions had mattered, and that, in their own quiet way, they had changed the perceptions of those around her. The evening would be remembered, not for wealth or status, but for the power of quiet courage and dignity. The restaurant slowly emptied as the evening drew to a close. The clatter of plates and soft conversations filled the air, but the energy at the billionaire's table had changed in a way that would linger far longer than the night itself. The earlier tension had evolved into quiet reflection. Guests who had come expecting a typical high-stakes dinner left with an unexpected lesson in humility and composure. The billionaire, now more subdued, leaned back in his chair and looked around the room. He had come with the intention of asserting authority, perhaps even of intimidating the staff. But the events of the evening had forced him to confront something he rarely faced. Someone who could command respect through calmness and intelligence rather than power and status. He recognized the depth of the waitress's skill, her ability to maintain composure, and the subtle authority she had carried throughout the dinner. For a man used to control, this was both uncomfortable and eye-opening. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her duties with quiet efficiency. She cleared tables, refilled glasses, and responded to requests with the same calm, polite demeanor she had maintained all night. There was no arrogance, no attempt to highlight her earlier triumph. She simply moved through the restaurant with grace, performing her role to the best of her ability. Yet those who had witnessed her earlier exchanges could see the impact she had made. Her dignity and confidence had left an impression that extended beyond the words she had spoken. As the billionaire prepared to leave, he caught her attention. There was no mocking tone, no expectation of submission. He simply nodded, acknowledging her presence. The gesture was small but significant. In that simple acknowledgement, there was recognition of skill, composure, and intelligence. It was a subtle apology of sorts, an unspoken admission that he had misjudged her abilities. The waitress nodded politely in return, maintaining her calm demeanor. Outside, the city was alive with lights and movement. The billionaire stepped into his car, reflecting on the evening. He was not used to being challenged in a quiet, dignified way. The experience had left him thoughtful, forcing him to reconsider assumptions about people, their abilities, and the power of composure. The lessons of the night were clear. Respect cannot be commanded through wealth or status alone. It must be earned and given through understanding and acknowledgement. Back inside the restaurant, the staff continued their work, but the mood had shifted. They had seen a rare display of human composure and intelligence, a reminder that humility and grace could change the dynamics of a situation far more than authority or intimidation. The manager, who had initially warned the waitress about the billionaire's temper, felt a renewed sense of pride. This young server had not only handled the situation but had also set an example that would be remembered long after the night ended. In the following days, the story quietly spread among those who had attended the dinner. Guests who had witnessed the exchanges spoke of the waitress's composure, intelligence, and ability to handle pressure. Even the billionaire, who rarely admitted such experiences, reflected privately on the lessons he had learned. It was a subtle, powerful reminder of the importance of humility, patience, and respect in interactions with others. The waitress returned to her routine with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had faced a challenging situation with grace, turning what could have been a humiliating experience into one that showcased her intelligence and strength of character. She did not seek recognition, yet her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. The impact of her composure and skill was clear to those who had witnessed it, leaving a lasting impression that transcended the immediate circumstances of the evening. Her story, though unremarkable on the surface, a young server performing her duties in a luxury restaurant, had a deeper significance. It was a story of quiet strength, of maintaining dignity under pressure, and of demonstrating that true competence is not measured by position or wealth, but by skill, patience, and character. The evening had revealed a profound truth. Anyone, regardless of their role or status, can command respect through calmness, knowledge, and integrity. As she left the restaurant that night, the waitress felt a sense of accomplishment that was quietly powerful. She had handled a situation that many would have found daunting, turning it into a demonstration of professionalism and personal strength. The lessons of the evening were clear not only to the billionaire but to everyone who had observed the events unfold. Respect and understanding are earned, not demanded. Patience and composure are forms of strength that can shift perceptions and dynamics without force or confrontation. The billionaire's experience, though private and internal, was equally significant. He had been reminded that assumptions based on appearance or occupation are often flawed. He had been humbled not by confrontation or argument, but by quiet competence and the human ability to remain composed under pressure. It was a rare lesson in humility, one that would stay with him in subtle ways. In the days and weeks that followed, the waitress continued her work with the same dedication and professionalism. The memory of that night remained with her as a quiet affirmation of her capabilities. She had demonstrated that skill, knowledge, and composure could command respect even in the most challenging situations. The experience had reinforced her understanding of human dynamics and the power of dignity, patience, and intelligence. Ultimately, the story of the evening became one of lasting impact. The billionaire, the guests, and the staff all carried with them a lesson in humility, respect, and the quiet authority that comes from composure and skill. The waitress, through her calm presence and intelligence, had transformed an ordinary evening into a remarkable demonstration of human strength. It was a story that would be remembered not for wealth or status, but for the power of quiet dignity and the enduring impression of competence, grace, and professionalism.